Obsidian. The obsidian. Scarlett felt like someone had punched her in the stomach, hard enough to steal her breath. The obsidian. The place where she'd sat beneath the overhang that night with her children. The place where the stranger stepped out and put the black card in her hand. The place she'd returned to leave the rose and the note. And Michael, the man from the park, the man who carried Ethan on his shoulders, the man who listened while she talked about Daniel, was Marcus Blackwood. He was the one who gave her the card. He was the mafia boss. The pieces snapped into place with the cruelty of a death sentence. The unlimited card, the convenient appearance at the park, the way he offered to walk with her all day, the questions about Daniel. None of it was accidental. None of it was coincidence. It was a game, a test. She was the lab rat in his experiment, and he was the scientist watching to see how she'd behave when money was placed in her hands. What had he been trying to prove? That she was greedy, that poor people would sell their souls if given the chance, that everyone had a price. Scarlett set the mop down, walked out of the common room, and went into the bathroom. She closed the door, leaned her back against the cold wall, and shut her eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there in the dimness and felt pain spread through her body like poison. This pain wasn't anger, though she had every right to be angry. It was deeper than that. It was disappointment. It was betrayal. It was realizing she had started to trust someone, started to open her heart to someone, and that person turned out to have never existed. Michael had never existed. There was only Marcus Blackwood, a mafia boss who had turned her into a game. What does he think I am? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling but dry. A lab rat. Entertainment for a bored rich man. Proof for some twisted theory of his. She thought about everything she'd shared with Michael in the coffee shop, about Daniel, about her pain, about letting go. She had opened her heart to him. She had shown him her deepest wounds. And he had sat there wearing a mask, acting. That hurt more than being watched, more than being tested. It was the betrayal of a connection she thought had been real. Scarlett opened her eyes and looked into the mirror. The woman staring back looked exhausted, but not broken. She had survived her husband's death. She had survived 18 months of losing everything. She had survived 6 months of homelessness. She would survive this too. But first, she needed answers. She needed to look Marcus Blackwood in the eyes and ask him why. Not to scream at him or demand an explanation, but because she deserved the truth. She deserved to face the man who had turned her into a game and tell him she was no one's puppet. She walked out of the bathroom, found Margaret and asked her to watch the children, then headed straight for the door. The Chicago night cut like a knife, but Scarlett felt nothing. She had only one destination in her mind. The obsidian. Scarlett stood in front of the obsidian, looking up at the sign blazing against the night. This was where she had crouched with her children in the snow, where a stranger had stepped out and changed her life in 24 hours. Now she knew who that man was, and she had come to face him. She walked toward the entrance, and 2 large security men stopped her immediately. "Sorry, ma'am, you can't come in," one of them said, his voice cold and automatic. Scarlett didn't step back. "Tell Marcus Blackwood that Scarlett Hayes wants to see him," she said, her voice so calm it surprised even her. The guard looked her up and down, clearly judging whether this thin woman in worn clothes had lost her mind, demanding to meet the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. But then he lifted a hand to his ear, listened to something through his earpiece, and his expression changed. "Mr. Blackwood has been expecting you." Top floor. Scarlett stepped into the elevator. The metal doors slid shut behind her, and she watched the floor numbers climb, one by one. She didn't know what it meant that Marcus had been expecting her. Maybe he'd been watching her through security cameras for 3 days. Maybe he knew she'd discover the truth and come here. Maybe everything, even this confrontation, was part of his plan. She didn't care. She only needed to look him in the eyes and say what she had come to say. The elevator doors opened, and Scarlett stepped into Marcus Blackwood's office. The room was vast and expensive, with glossy oak floors, costly paintings on the walls, and a heavy mahogany desk set before a wall of glass that looked out over all of Chicago. Marcus stood by the window with his back to her, but she knew he knew she was there. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his shadow cast against the city lights like a lonely monument. A test, Scarlett said, breaking the silence. Her voice carried through the room, steady, not trembling, not weak. It was all a test. The card, the 24 hours, you showing up in the park under a fake name, you walking with me all day and pretending to care. It was all an experiment to see what I'd do with your money. Marcus turned, and for the first time since she learned the truth, Scarlett looked him straight in the eyes. Those black eyes were still as deep as she remembered, but now she saw something else there. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, maybe something close to pain. You're right, Marcus said, his voice low and tired. It was a test. I wanted to prove that no one is truly good, that when enough money is in their hands, people show their selfish nature. That kindness is only a mask people wear when they don't have enough money to live as they really are. And I didn't do what you expected. No. You destroyed everything I believed. Marcus stepped closer, but still kept distance. I watched you spend $27,000 of my money without keeping a single cent for yourself. I watched you help strangers, cry for their happiness, give everything away without asking for anything back. I watched you, and I don't understand. I still don't understand. Scarlett looked at him, and the pain in her chest rose like a wave. Do you know what hurt the most, Marcus Blackwood? She said his real name for the first time, and she saw him flinch, not being watched, not being tested like a lab rat. It's that I started to trust you, to trust Michael, the man in the park, the man who listened when I talked about Daniel, the man who looked at me like I mattered. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held it steady. I started to think maybe, just maybe, I'd met a decent man, and it turns out that man never existed. Marcus closed his eyes, as if her words were knives cutting into him. You think Michael never existed, but you're wrong. He opened his eyes and looked straight at her with a nakedness that made Scarlett feel as if she were staring into his soul. I started to believe in you too, Scarlett. To believe maybe there is someone truly good in this world. And that scares me. More than any bullet ever aimed at me. Because if you're truly good, then everything I've believed for 12 years is a lie. And I don't know how to live with that truth. They stood facing each other in silence. Two people from two different worlds, both carrying wounds, both in pain. Then Scarlett spoke again, her voice softer, but still firm. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry hatred. I told you in that coffee shop that living in hatred would kill me first. That's still true. She stepped back toward the elevator. But I can't stay here. I can't be part of your world, where everything is calculation, everything is testing, everything is a game. I deserve more than that. Marcus wanted to say something, wanted to stop her, but he didn't know what to say. He only stood there and watched her walk toward the elevator. Scarlett paused and looked back at him one last time. You've got all the money in the world, Marcus Blackwood, but you're poorer than I am, because you've got no one to trust, no one to love, no one who'll stay with you when you've got nothing left. And that's the greatest tragedy of your life. The elevator doors slid shut, and Scarlett was gone, leaving Marcus alone in an office that was luxurious and empty. He stared out the window at the bright city beneath him, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. 2 weeks had passed since the night Scarlett walked out of Marcus's office, and her words were still echoing in his head like a bell that never stopped ringing. You're poorer than I am, because you've got no one to trust, no one to love. Those words followed him into sleep, turned into nightmares, then dragged him awake at 3 a.m. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through a full night. He lay on the king-size bed in his luxurious penthouse, staring at the ceiling, and felt emptiness spreading through his chest like a disease with no cure. He had everything money could buy, but he didn't have what Scarlett had, the peace of looking into a mirror and not hating the person staring back. A week after the confrontation, Marcus did something he had never done in his life. He put on jeans and an old hoodie, pulled a baseball cap low, and drove to the Mercy Street shelter. Not to see Scarlett. He knew she wouldn't want to look at him, but to help. He arrived early in the morning, when Scarlett had taken the children to school at the community center nearby, and asked Margaret for work. The manager looked at him with suspicion, but the shelter was always short-handed, so she gave him the job of fixing broken chairs in the dining room. Marcus picked up a hammer and nails, tools he hadn't touched since he was a child in the slums, and he started working. His hands were clumsy, his nails bent, the chairs came out crooked, but he didn't quit. He worked for 3 hours, fixed 7 chairs, and when he left, Margaret said, "Thank you, young man. Come back next week." Marcus nodded, and for the first time in years, he felt something warm in his chest that he didn't know how to name. He returned to the shelter every day after that, always at times when Scarlett wasn't there. He repaired doors, replaced light bulbs, installed new bookshelves for the common room. He sat and talked with the homeless residents, listened to their stories, learned their names, learned their lives. Harold told him about years in the military, about wounds that never healed, about the wife he'd lost. A young woman named Sarah told him how she'd fled an abusive husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. An old man named George told him how he lost his job, lost his home, lost everything because of an illness his insurance wouldn't cover. Marcus listened, and each story felt like a brick laid into a new wall inside him. A wall built from empathy instead of suspicion. Tony was the first to notice the change. One afternoon, he walked into Marcus's office and found his boss looking over donation files for charities instead of financial reports from the underworld empire. "What are you doing?" Tony asked, disbelief in his voice. Marcus looked up, his eyes tired, but something new lived in them, maybe hope, maybe purpose. "Learning how to be human, Tony." After 36 years, Tony didn't speak. He only nodded and backed away, but he smiled, and Marcus knew it was the smile of support. But Marcus didn't stop at donations and repairs. He had another mission, one that mattered more. He began investigating Daniel Hayes' death. He remembered what Scarlett had said in the coffee shop, about the police husband, the organized crime investigation, the car accident she didn't believe was an accident. He called in the men he trusted most, the ones who had been with him from the earliest days, and ordered them to find everything connected to Daniel Hayes, a Chicago police officer who died 2 years ago. He didn't explain why, and they didn't ask. That was the rule in his world. 2 weeks later, the results started coming in, and what Marcus read made the blood in his body turn to ice. Daniel Hayes hadn't been investigating an ordinary gang. He had been investigating one of the most secret operations in Chicago's underworld empire, and the network he'd been digging into was directly tied to a name Marcus knew all too well. Vincent Caruso, one of Marcus's own capos, the man Marcus had trusted for 10 years. Marcus set the file down, looked out the window, and felt his world collapsing for the second time this month. But this time he didn't run. He would find the truth, even if the truth destroyed everything. Marcus sat in his dark office, lit only by the glow of his laptop screen on his face. In front of him lay a thick stack of files, evidence his men had gathered over the past 2 weeks. He had read every page at least 10 times, hoping he'd read it wrong, hoping there was another explanation. But there wasn't. The truth sat there in black and white, and it was crushing him from the inside. Daniel Hayes, Scarlett's husband, had died because he investigated Vincent Caruso's drug trafficking and money laundering operation. And Vincent Caruso was a capo under Marcus Blackwood. The file laid out every piece of the tragedy. 2 years earlier, Daniel Hayes had been assigned to investigate a major drug ring operating on Chicago's South Side. He was a good cop, too good for Vincent to buy or threaten. He dug into Vincent's operation, gathered evidence, built a case, and he was only a few weeks away from taking down the entire network. Vincent learned about it through a corrupt officer inside the department, and he decided to act. The night Daniel died, 2 men cut his brake line, turning murder into a perfect accident. Vincent paid them $50,000, and they disappeared from Chicago immediately afterward. Marcus read the names of those 2 men and realized he knew them. They had worked for his organization before they moved over to Vincent. They were his men, not directly, but still his. He stared at Daniel Hayes' photo in the police file, a young man with a bright smile and eyes full of ideals, and Marcus felt sick. This was the husband Scarlett had lost. This was the father Sophie and Ethan would never meet, and he had died because of the empire Marcus had built. Marcus stood, walked to the window, and looked out at Chicago submerged in night. He hadn't ordered Daniel Hayes killed. He hadn't even known Daniel Hayes existed until he met Scarlett under the Obsidian's overhang. But did that matter? Vincent was his man. Vincent's operation, even if it was secret, still lived in the shadow of the empire Marcus had created. The men who killed Daniel had once worked for him. The money Vincent used to pay for that murder could have come from operations Marcus had approved. Even without a direct order, Marcus's hands were still stained with blood. Daniel Hayes's blood, Scarlett's husband's blood. I didn't kill him directly, Marcus whispered to his own reflection in the glass, his voice rough, like he was trying to convince himself. But he died because of the world I created, because of the empire I built, because of the monsters I fed. He closed his eyes, and Scarlett's face rose in his mind. Her sitting in that coffee shop, talking about Daniel, the best man she'd ever known, the wonderful father of her children. She spoke about forgiveness, about letting go of hatred so she could keep living, and Marcus had sat there and listened, not knowing he was the source of her tragedy. Tony stepped into the office and Marcus didn't know when. "You've finished the file," Tony said. Not a question, but a statement. Marcus nodded without turning around. Vincent was running his own operation without my approval. He thought I didn't know. He thought he could build his own little empire under my shadow. Marcus's voice went cold, but not the coldness of a mafia boss. The coldness of a man slowly dying inside. Daniel Hayes died because he dug too deep into Vincent's business. And I, the man who's supposed to control everything, knew nothing. Tony was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do about Vincent?" "Turn him over to the police, along with all the evidence." Marcus turned, his eyes dark, but filled with resolve. "He'll pay for what he did. Not the underworld way. The way justice works. The way Daniel Hayes believed in." "And Scarlett?" Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, there was something like tears in them, though none fell. "I'm going to tell her the truth. All of it. That I know who killed her husband. That it was my subordinate. That even if I didn't order it, Daniel still died because of the empire I built." He paused, his voice tightening. "She'll never forgive me. And she has every right. But she deserves the truth. She deserves to know who stole her husband, so she can find real peace instead of living with questions that never get answered." Tony looked at his boss, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't see a mafia king. He saw a man trying to do the right thing, even if it was too late, even if it would cost him everything. "When will you tell her?" "Tomorrow." Marcus looked out the window, where dawn was beginning to show on Chicago's horizon. "I'll find her and tell her everything, and whatever happens, happens." Marcus found Scarlett at Riverside Park the next afternoon. She was sitting alone on the familiar bench, the one where they had first met when he was still wearing Michael's mask. Sophie and Ethan weren't there, probably at the community center studying, or with Margaret watching them. Scarlett stared out at the frozen lake, her face calm, but her eyes distant, as if her mind was somewhere far away. Marcus stood a few steps from her, hesitating. He'd faced bullets, betrayal, death, but he had never felt fear like this. Fear of what he was about to say, fear of the way she would look at him once she knew the truth. But he had decided, and Marcus Blackwood didn't change his decisions. He walked over and sat down beside her, leaving enough space that he didn't invade her. Scarlett didn't turn to look, but she knew he was there. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice so calm it startled Marcus. "Margaret told me a man has been coming to the shelter every day to fix things and help. She doesn't know who you are, but I do." She turned to him, her green eyes deep and unreadable. "Why are you here, Marcus?" Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he was about to say. "I found the man who killed your husband." Scarlett froze, her whole body locked as if someone had poured ice water over her. She stared at Marcus, eyes wide, lips parted, but no sound came out. 2 years living with questions that had no answers. 2 years knowing Daniel hadn't died in an accident, but unable to prove it. And now the man in front of her, the mafia boss who had turned her into a game, was the one bringing the truth. "His name is Vincent Caruso," Marcus said, his voice low and even, as if he were reading his own sentence. "He's a capo under me, one of the high-ranking men in my organization. He was running a drug and money laundering operation on the South Side. a secret operation I didn't know about. Your husband, Daniel, investigated that ring. He was a good cop, too good. He was close to bringing Vincent's whole operation down. Marcus paused, swallowing. So Vincent ordered him killed. They cut Daniel's brake line and turned murder into an accident. Tears began to run down Scarlett's face, clear drops sliding along her cheeks. But she didn't sob. She only sat there looking at Marcus, and the tears kept coming, like small rivers that wouldn't run dry. I didn't order Daniel's death, Marcus went on, his voice thick. I didn't even know he existed until I met you. But Vincent was my man. The men who killed Daniel once worked for my organization. The operation Daniel investigated lived under the shadow of the empire I built. He looked straight into Scarlett's eyes, not hiding, not making excuses. The world I created killed your husband, Scarlett, and I'm sorry. I know sorry is meaningless. It doesn't bring Daniel back. It doesn't erase 2 years of pain and unanswered questions, but it's all I can say. Scarlett was silent for a long time. The tears still fell, but her face didn't show anything else. Then she asked, her voice a whisper like wind, "What did you do to Vincent?" "He's in jail," Marcus answered. "I turned him over to the police with all the evidence. About Daniel's murder, about the drug ring, about everything. He'll never get out." Scarlett looked at him, and for the first time, something else appeared in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe surprise, or something close to unwilling respect. "You betrayed your own man. You handed one of your capos to the police. In your world, what does that mean? You could be killed for that." "I know. Why? Why did you do it?" "For me," Marcus shook his head slowly, "for justice. Daniel deserved justice, even in death. He was a good man, a good officer, and he died trying to do what was right." He looked at Scarlett, and in his eyes was something she had never seen in the cold Mafia king. Absolute sincerity. "And for you, you deserved the truth. You deserved real peace, instead of living with unanswered questions for the rest of your life." Scarlett didn't speak. She only sat there staring at the frozen lake, tears still falling. And Marcus sat beside her in silence, waiting, not knowing what would happen next, but knowing that whatever came, he had done what was right. News that Marcus handed Vincent Caruso over to the police spread through Chicago's underworld like wildfire. Within a week, everyone knew, and the reaction was more violent than anything Marcus had expected. Vincent, even sitting in jail awaiting trial, still had influence. He had money, he had loyal men, and he had a deep hatred for the one who had betrayed him. From behind bars, he began pulling strings, sending messages to those still faithful, stirring up the resentment that had already been smoldering inside the organization. Marcus Blackwood had gone soft, they whispered to each other. He had betrayed one of his own for a homeless woman. He no longer deserved to lead. Scarlett started to sense something was wrong when she noticed unfamiliar cars parked near the shelter every day. Men in black coats stood on street corners, pretending to read newspapers or smoke, but their eyes never stopped tracking her. One morning, when she took Sophie and Ethan to the community center, a piece of paper was tucked into her coat pocket, and she didn't know when it had gotten there. She opened it and read, and her heart turned to ice. "Stay away from Blackwood or the children will pay." No signature, no trace, only a threat, cold as a blade. At the same time, inside the Obsidian, Marcus was facing a rebellion. The 4 highest capos in his organization sat across from him in the conference room, their faces hard as stone. The one who spoke was Roberto Santini, a 50-year-old man with silver hair and eyes like a cobra. "Marcus, we've followed you for 12 years. We've killed for you, died for you, sacrificed everything for you. And now you betray one of our own for a woman." Roberto leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Drop her. Get back to business. Prove you're still fit to lead, or we'll find someone else." Marcus looked at them one by one. Men he'd known for years. Men he'd once considered allies, even brothers. And he saw the truth Scarlett had spoken to him in this very office weeks earlier. He had no one to trust, no one truly on his side. They followed him for money, for power, for fear. Not for loyalty, not for love. I'll think about it, Marcus said, his voice giving nothing away. You can go. The capos left, and Marcus sat alone in the empty conference room, head bowed, hands clenched tight. Tony walked in a few minutes later, worry written across his face. They're not bluffing, Marcus. They'll move if you don't do what they want. I know. So what are you going to do? Marcus didn't answer. He only stood and walked out. That night, Scarlett came to the Obsidian. She'd heard about the threats, about the meeting with the capos, about the danger closing in around Marcus. Margaret had told her. After hearing it from someone she knew in the neighborhood, security let her in without questions, and she found Marcus standing by the office window, staring out at the city as if he could find an answer in the flicker of distant lights. Don't choose me, Scarlett said, her voice trembling but steady. Don't choose me if it means giving up everything you built. I'm not worth you losing it all. Marcus turned to her, and in his eyes was something Scarlett had never seen before. Peace, not surrender, not defeat. The peace of a man who had finally found an answer after years of searching. Give up what? He asked, stepping closer. Money, power, an underground empire. He shook his head slowly. That isn't what I built, Scarlett. It's the prison I locked myself inside. 12 years living in it, thinking I was free because I could buy anything, do anything. But I wasn't free. I was chained by suspicion, by loneliness, by the fear that no one truly cared about me. He lifted his hand and touched her cheek gently, and Scarlett didn't step away. You and the children, Marcus went on, his voice tightening. Your freedom, your meaning, you're the first thing in my life that's made me want to be better. Not for profit, not for advantage, but because I want to deserve standing beside you. But they'll kill you, Scarlett whispered, tears beginning to spill. They won't, Marcus said, certainty in every word. I'll hand the organization to Tony. He's loyal, and more than that, he's respected. I'll leave, on one condition only. No one touches you or the children. That's the price of a smooth transfer of power. They'll agree, because they want power more than they want revenge. Are you sure? Marcus nodded. I'm sure. And even if I wasn't, I'd still do it. Because for the first time in my life, I've got something worth risking everything for. He looked into her eyes, and in that look Scarlett saw love, the thing she thought she would never see again after Daniel was gone. Will you give me a chance, Scarlett? A chance to prove I can become a man worthy of you. Scarlett didn't answer with words. She only stepped closer, rested her head against his chest, and let him hold her in the quiet office. Outside, a snowstorm was coming, but in each other's arms, they found warmth. 6 months had passed since that night of the snowstorm in the Obsidian office. 6 months of change, of healing, of small steps taken toward each other. Marcus kept his promise. He handed the entire organization over to Tony, with one condition only, that Scarlett and the children would be protected absolutely. The capos agreed, because power mattered more than revenge. And Marcus Blackwood vanished from Chicago's underworld as if he had never existed. He sold the luxury penthouse, moved into a small house in the suburbs, and spent every day proving to Scarlett that he had changed. He drove Sophie to school every morning, read bedtime stories to Ethan every night, and learned how to cook, even though everything he made ended up burned. He wasn't perfect, but he tried, and to Scarlett, that mattered more than any kind of perfection. That night, the night marking 6 months since they officially became a couple, Marcus took Scarlett to Riverside Park. Snow was falling lightly, white flakes drifting in the warm yellow glow of the streetlights, just like the first night they met under the Obsidian's overhang. Sophie and Ethan were already waiting there, each holding a small candle, their faces bright with the secret they'd kept all week. Scarlett looked around, surprised, and when she turned back, Marcus was down on one knee in the snow, a red velvet box open in his hand, a simple ring inside it with a small diamond. Scarlet Hayes, Marcus said, his voice trembling from emotion, not from cold. You taught me that real wealth isn't in a safe or a bank account. It lives in the heart, in family, in the people we love. You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Will you say yes, and let me love you for the rest of my life? Sophie bounced on her toes, unable to hold back her excitement. Say yes, Mom. Say yes. Ethan was simpler. I want Dad Marcus to stay with us forever. Scarlett looked down at the man kneeling in front of her, the man who had once been the coldest mafia boss in Chicago, the man who had tested her, who had hurt her, but who had also changed because of her, who had found the truth about Daniel because of her, who had given up everything because of her. Tears ran down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, 1,000,000 times yes. Marcus slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into his arms. Sophie and Ethan ran in and wrapped their arms around both their legs, and the four of them stood there in the falling snow. A family, at last. The wedding took place a month later, not in a grand church or a 5-star hotel, but at the Mercy Street shelter, where their story had truly begun. The guests weren't rich or powerful people, but the homeless residents Scarlett had helped, the Morrison family with their 3 children now living in stable housing, Harold in an old suit that had been pressed smooth, Margaret crying through the entire ceremony from happiness. Tony came as best man, and he smiled as he watched his former boss stand at the altar. No longer a mafia king, only a man in love. When it was time for vows, Marcus held Scarlett's hands and spoke through a tight, shaking voice. You taught me that being soft isn't weakness, that giving doesn't mean losing, that trusting other people isn't foolish. You taught me how to be human. After 36 years of forgetting who I was, I promise I'll love you, protect you, and remind you every day that you deserve to be loved. 2 years later, the Blackwood Hayes Foundation had become one of the largest charities in Chicago. They had helped more than 2,000 families find stable housing, provided job training for hundreds of unemployed people, and built 3 free clinics for the homeless. Scarlett completed her nursing certification and worked at one of those clinics, caring for people who had once been like her, people who had lost everything but were still fighting to stand back up. Marcus worked beside her every day, not as a boss, but as a volunteer, an ordinary man trying to do good. Sophie was 8 now, still smart and older than her years, but she laughed more. Ethan was 6, healthy and mischievous, no longer coughing all night or shivering with cold. And in Scarlett's arms, a new member of the family slept peacefully, a 6-month-old baby boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's black hair. They named him Daniel, after Scarlett's first husband, the biological father of Sophie and Ethan, the good man who died trying to do what was right. Today, their family stood in front of a newly opened building on Chicago's South Side, once the poorest and most dangerous part of the city. A large sign in front of it read Daniel Hayes Community Center, a community center built to help struggling families, to honor a police officer who sacrificed himself for justice. Scarlett looked up at the sign, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Marcus stood beside her, one arm around her, the other holding baby Daniel. Sophie and Ethan stood in front, staring up at their father's name with pride. He'd be so happy, Scarlett whispered. He's watching, Marcus replied. And he's proud of you, of the kids, of everything we've built. They stood there in the afternoon sun, a family born from suffering and loss, but one that had found light in the dark. And their story was proof of a simple truth many people have forgotten. Sometimes the devil doesn't need to be destroyed. He only needs to be loved, until he remembers he was once an angel. This story leaves us with a deep lesson about kindness and forgiveness, that no one is born bad, and it's never too late to change. That real wealth isn't money, but the people who love us, that when we give, we don't lose. We receive back more than we ever imagined. And that love, kindness, forgiveness, those are the most extraordinary powers of all, powerful enough to change the whole world. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share the video so more people can hear meaningful stories like this every day. We'd love to know how you feel about this story. Did it make you think of someone in real life? Did it remind you of a time you were helped, or a time you helped someone else? Please share what's in your heart in the comments below. We read every comment, and we value every story you share. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.